I took a deep breath as I stepped out of my front door, the cool morning air filling my lungs. The neighborhood was quiet at 5:30 a.m., just how I liked it. My running shoes hit the pavement with a familiar rhythm as I began my daily 5-mile jog. This had been my routine for nearly 20 years now. Wake up at 5 a.m., jog, shower, breakfast with Elizabeth, and then off to my dental practice by 7:30. At 58, I prided myself on maintaining this discipline. My practice was thriving. Our Tudor-style home in Oakwood Estates was the envy of our friends, and Elizabeth and I were approaching our 30th anniversary. Our children, Michael and Sarah, had both graduated from prestigious universities and were building successful careers of their own. Michael was an architect in Chicago, and Sarah had recently been promoted to marketing director at her firm in Boston. Perfect, I whispered to myself as I rounded the corner back onto our street. The perfect life. Later that evening, I sat with Elizabeth on our back patio, sharing a bottle of Cabernet as we often did on Friday nights. I was thinking, Elizabeth said, swirling her wine, we should look at that property in Naples again, for retirement. I nodded, studying my wife's face. At 56, Elizabeth was still beautiful. Her blonde hair now elegantly highlighted to conceal the gray, her figure trimmed from her regular tennis matches and yoga classes. She'd been a successful real estate agent for over 20 years, specializing in luxury properties. That sounds good, I replied. Maybe we can fly down in October, after the Henderson wedding. Elizabeth smiled, but I noticed it didn't quite reach her eyes. She'd been more distant lately, but I attributed it to stress from work. The real estate market had been particularly competitive this year. The following Sunday, I was updating our home computer's security software when a notification popped up about duplicate files taking up space. I clicked through to the cleanup tool, scanning through the list of redundant documents. That's when I noticed a folder labeled Property Listings Archive with an unusual file path. Curious, I opened it, expecting to find Elizabeth's work documents. Instead, I found hundreds of emails between Elizabeth and someone named Mark. My heart began to race as I clicked on one dated just 3 days ago. I can still feel your touch from yesterday. The way you held me, the way you whispered my name. I've never felt so alive, so desired. When can I see you again? E. My hands trembled as I opened another email, then another. The messages dated back 6 months, growing increasingly intimate. Photos were exchanged. Elizabeth in lingerie I'd never seen, a man's muscular torso, hotel room numbers. That night, I lay awake beside Elizabeth, listening to her steady breathing, wondering how many times she had come home from this man's bed to sleep beside me. The thought made me physically ill. Over the next few days, I began noticing things I'd overlooked. Elizabeth's showings had increased dramatically in the past 6 months, particularly on evenings and weekends. She joined a new fitness club across town rather than using the one at our country club. Her phone was now password protected, and she took calls in another room. When she left for work the following Saturday, I began my investigation. I logged into our shared cell phone account and downloaded the call history. One number appeared repeatedly, often with calls lasting an hour or more. I wrote it down. HXST. Next, I checked our credit card statements. Elizabeth had her own card on our joint account, and I found charges at restaurants I'd never been to, a boutique hotel downtown, and several expensive lingerie purchases. The most damning evidence came when I checked the GPS history on her car, a feature she didn't know I could access. Multiple trips to an address on Lake Norman, about 40 minutes from our home. I remembered Elizabeth mentioning she'd sold a lakefront property to a businessman a few months ago. Had she actually sold it? Or was this where they met? The following day, I called my brother James for lunch. We met at a diner far from my usual haunts. I think Elizabeth is having an affair, I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. James's expression shifted from shock to anger to sympathy. Are you sure? I don't know. Part of me wants to confront her immediately, but another part wants to know everything first. James nodded slowly. I know a guy. Private investigator. Former cop. He's discreet. 3 days later, I sat in John Michael's office as he laid out photos on his desk. Elizabeth's BMW parked at a modern glass and stone house on the lake. Elizabeth entering with her own key. Elizabeth and a man tall, dark-haired, probably early 40s, embracing on the deck. More intimate photos through the windows that made me look away. His name is Mark Wilson, John explained. 43, divorced, no children. Made his money in tech, sold his company 2 years ago. According to property records, He purchased this lake house 4 months ago through your wife's agency. She did. And then she kept selling herself to him, John replied, his voice matter-of-fact. Based on my surveillance and the digital evidence you provided, the affair has been going on for approximately 6 months. John hesitated. Mr. Thompson, in my experience, affairs like this rarely stay private. Several of the neighbors at the lake know your wife by name. They assume she's his girlfriend. The humiliation burned through me. How many of our friends knew? How many had pitied me behind my back? That depends on what you want. If you're considering divorce, we have enough evidence. If you want to try to save your marriage, you need to confront her. I nodded, an idea forming. Our anniversary is next week. I'll do it then. Our 30th anniversary fell on a Thursday. I suggested we celebrate at home with a special dinner rather than going out. Elizabeth seemed pleased, perhaps even relieved that I hadn't planned something more elaborate that would interfere with her affair. I left work early to prepare. I cooked her favorite meal beef Wellington, roasted asparagus, and potatoes dauphinoise. I set the dining room table with our best china and crystal, lit candles, and put on the jazz playlist she loved. Robert, this is beautiful, she said, kissing my cheek. She was wearing a new dress I hadn't seen before, and I wondered if she'd bought it for him. 30 years deserves a celebration, I replied, pouring her a glass of champagne. Throughout dinner, we reminisced about our early days together, our children's milestones, the home we'd built. Elizabeth seemed genuinely engaged, laughing at old stories and reaching across to squeeze my hand. For a moment, I almost convinced myself I was wrong about everything. She smiled, looking almost girlish with anticipation. You shouldn't have. She untied the ribbon and lifted the lid. Her smile froze as she saw what was inside printed copies of her emails with Mark, photos from the PI, hotel receipts, a detailed timeline of their affair. Really, because I think my wife of 30 years has been fucking a man 15 years her junior for the past 6 months. I think she's been lying to my face every day, coming home from his bed to sleep in mine. I think she's made me a laughingstock among our friends and neighbors. Tears spilled down her cheeks. It was just physical. It didn't mean anything. My carefully maintained composure finally broke. Just physical? I shouted, slamming my hand on the table, making the crystal jump. Is that supposed to make me feel better? That you risked our entire life together for something that didn't mean anything? You don't understand, she sobbed. You haven't really seen me in years, Robert. You're so caught up in your routines, your practice, your perfect life. When was the last time you looked at me with desire? When was the last time we did anything spontaneous? So this is my fault? I asked incredulously. I worked 60-hour weeks for decades to build this life for us. I supported your career, I was faithful, I was here every single day. And your response to feeling unseen was to cheat rather than talk to me? I tried talking to you, she shot back. Remember last year when I suggested we take that Mediterranean cruise? You said we should wait until retirement. Or when I wanted to renovate the kitchen, you said it was perfectly functional as is. Every time I tried to inject some excitement into our lives, you chose the safe, predictable option. And that justifies betraying me? Humiliating me? Throwing away 30 years of marriage? Elizabeth's shoulders slumped. No, she whispered. Nothing justifies what I did. I got caught up in how he made me feel. Desired, exciting, alive. I told myself it was just a fling, that it wouldn't affect us. Well, you were wrong, I said, standing up. It has affected us. It's destroyed us. Robert, please. She reached for my hand. We can work through this. I'll end it with Mark. I'll do whatever it takes. I pulled away from her touch. I need time to think. I can't even look at you right now. That night, Elizabeth slept in the guest room, while I sat alone in our backyard, staring at the stars. 30 years of marriage, decades of shared history, countless memories, all tainted now by her betrayal. How could I ever trust her again? How could I ever look at her without seeing her in another man's arms? The following morning, I packed a suitcase and drove to our vacation condo at Wrightsville Beach. I needed space to think, to breathe, to process the devastation of Elizabeth's betrayal. The 2-bedroom condo had always been our escape, but now it became my refuge. I called my office manager to reschedule my appointments for the next week, citing a family emergency. Then I called Michael and Sarah. "Dad, what's going on?" Michael asked, concern evident in his voice. "Mom called me crying last night, but she wouldn't say what happened." "Your mother and I are taking some time apart," I said, choosing my words carefully. "We're having some issues we need to work through." There was a long pause. "I suspected," she admitted. "Last time I was home, Mom was acting strange, always on her phone, smiling at texts. And I overheard her on the phone once, talking in a way she never talks to you." "I didn't want to believe it," Sarah continued, her voice breaking. "I didn't want to be the one to tell you." "It's not your burden to bear," I assured her. "I just need some time to figure out what happens next." Over the next few weeks, Elizabeth made numerous attempts at reconciliation. She sent tearful voicemails, apologetic texts, and even showed up at my practice one afternoon, causing an uncomfortable scene in the waiting room. "I ended it with Mark," she told me, her eyes red-rimmed. "I told him I made a terrible mistake. Please come home, Robert. We can fix this." Meanwhile, I threw myself into my work, extended my office hours, and reconnected with old friends I'd neglected over the years. I started having dinner once a week with James and his wife, finding comfort in family who knew the truth and supported me without judgment. The most difficult aspect was navigating our social circle. At a charity event I attended alone, I overheard whispers as I passed. "That's Robert Thompson. His wife's been having an affair with that developer from Charlotte." The humiliation was almost worse than the betrayal. I'd been made a fool of, and everyone knew it. When our country club's membership director approached me with sympathy in his eyes, I realized just how public Elizabeth's indiscretion had become. "Robert, we've known each other for 20 years, he said, placing a hand on my shoulder. "If you need anything, just ask. And don't worry about running into certain people here. We've made it clear to Mr. Wilson that his application for membership is unlikely to be approved." After 6 weeks at the condo, I finally agreed to meet with Elizabeth at a neutral location, a quiet cafe in a neighboring town. She looked thinner, her usually perfect appearance slightly disheveled. "I've been seeing a therapist," I told her, getting straight to the point. "And I've consulted with a divorce attorney." Her face crumpled. "Robert, please, we can try counseling. 30 years shouldn't end like this." "I've given this a lot of thought," I continued. "I've asked myself if I could ever trust you again, if I could ever look at you without seeing you with him, if I could ever believe a word you say. And I can't. The woman I thought I married wouldn't have done this. She wouldn't have lied to my face day after day. She wouldn't have risked our family, our reputation. Everything we built together for an affair she claims meant nothing." Elizabeth wiped away tears. "People make mistakes, Robert. Terrible mistakes. But they can be forgiven." "I agree," I said, "but forgiveness doesn't mean staying together. I can eventually forgive you for my own peace, but I can't rebuild a marriage on such a broken foundation." She suggested marriage counseling one final time, and I agreed to a single session, more for closure than reconciliation. The counselor, a compassionate woman in her 60s, listened as we both shared our perspectives. "Elizabeth," I said during that session, "I value the 30 years we had together. I cherish the family we created. But your betrayal has permanently altered how I see you and our relationship. I can't unknow what I know. I can't unsee what I've seen." The counselor asked if I was open to the possibility of reconciliation with time and work. I was honest. The following week, I presented Elizabeth with fair divorce terms through my attorney. I would keep my practice and my retirement accounts. She would keep her real estate business and her investments. We would sell the house and split the proceeds. The condo would be mine. It was generous considering the circumstances. I could have fought for more given her infidelity. Elizabeth initially balked at signing, still holding out hope for reconciliation. But when I remained firm, she eventually agreed to the terms. The divorce proceedings moved forward, but the ripple effects of our separation spread far beyond legal documents. Our close-knit friend group of 30 years fractured almost immediately. Some friends, particularly the husbands, rallied around me with invitations to golf games and poker nights. Others, mainly couples who were closer to Elizabeth, distanced themselves from both of us, uncomfortable with taking sides. The Andersons, who had been our closest friends for decades, stopped inviting either of us to their events. When I ran into Jim Anderson at the hardware store, the encounter was painfully awkward. "Listen," he said, shifting uncomfortably. "Carol and we care about both of you. This puts us in a difficult position." I nodded, understanding but still hurt. "I get it, Jim. I don't expect anyone to choose sides." But people did choose sides, and relationships that had been part of the fabric of my life unraveled with surprising speed. The impact on our children was even more profound. Michael, always pragmatic like me, tried to maintain equal relationships with both parents. Sarah, however, struggled more visibly with the new family dynamic. "Dad, how am I supposed to plan my wedding now?" she asked during a tearful phone call. "Will you and Mom even be able to be in the same room? Will it be awkward if I invite Mark? Because I don't want him there, but if Mom is still seeing him—" "Your wedding should be about you and David," I assured her. "Your mother and I will behave like adults, I promise. And as for Mark, that's a conversation you need to have with your mother." My dental practice suffered temporarily as my focus wavered. I found myself making small errors, scheduling conflicts, forgetting to order supplies, missing details during examinations. My hygienist of 15 years, Margaret, finally confronted me. "Dr. Thompson, you need to take some real time off," she said firmly. "You're not yourself, and it's affecting your work." She was right. I took a 2-week vacation, my first in years, and drove up the coast to Maine, staying in small inns and walking along empty beaches. The solitude was both painful and healing. The most difficult moment came 3 months after our separation. I had decided to try a new restaurant in Charlotte, a place I'd heard had excellent steaks. As the hostess led me to my table, I spotted them immediately. Elizabeth and Mark, sitting in a corner booth, his hand covering hers on the table. Elizabeth saw me first, her eyes widening in shock. I nodded stiffly and continued to my table, which unfortunately gave me a clear view of them. Throughout my meal I could feel their discomfort, see their whispered conversation. They left before dessert, Elizabeth avoiding eye contact as they passed my table. "Not great," I admitted. Seeing them together made it real in a way it wasn't before. "She's actually with him now. They're a couple." "Rob, listen to me." Elizabeth made her choice, and it wasn't you. That's her loss, not yours. You're a good man who deserved better than what she gave you. His words helped, but the image of Elizabeth with Mark haunted me for weeks. 8 months into our separation, with the divorce nearly finalized, I had an epiphany while sitting alone in my condo. For 30 years, I had defined myself primarily as Elizabeth's husband, as part of a couple. My identity had been so intertwined with hers that her betrayal had left me not just heartbroken but fundamentally lost. I started small. I joined a cycling club that rode along the coastal roads every Saturday morning. In my younger days, before the responsibilities of marriage and career took over, I'd been an avid cyclist. The first few rides were physically punishing, my body protesting the sudden demand, but the rush of endorphins and the camaraderie of the group became something I looked forward to each week. Next, I renovated the condo, something Elizabeth and I had discussed but never prioritized. I replaced the dated furniture, painted the walls a deep blue instead of the neutral beige Elizabeth had preferred, and hung artwork that appealed to my personal taste, modern, abstract pieces that Elizabeth would have vetoed. The most significant transformation, however, came in my relationships with my children. Rather than shielding them from my pain, I began having honest conversations about the divorce and my feelings. "I'm angry," I admitted to Michael during one of his visits. "I'm hurt and humiliated, and sometimes I still can't believe this happened to us." "I'm angry too, Dad," he confessed. "At Mom, at that guy, at the whole situation. But I'm trying not to take sides." "You don't have to," I assured him. "She's still your mother, and she still loves you. This is between her and me." With Sarah, the conversations were more emotional but equally healing. She worried that her parents' failed marriage somehow predicted doom for her own upcoming nuptials. "What if I make the same mistake?" she asked tearfully. "What if David changes, or I change, or we just stop seeing each other?" "Marriage takes work," I told her. "It takes honesty and communication. Things your mother and I clearly failed at. But that doesn't mean you will. You and David already communicate better than we ever did." These conversations strengthened my bonds with my children in ways I hadn't anticipated. They saw me as a complete person now, not just their father, and I saw them as the thoughtful adults they'd become. At work, my partner Dr. Chen suggested expanding our practice to include more cosmetic procedures, something I'd resisted for years, preferring to focus on general and restorative dentistry. The market is changing, Robert, he argued. People want more than just healthy teeth. They want beautiful smiles. We have the skills. We just need to shift our focus a bit. To my own surprise, I embraced the idea. We invested in new equipment, attended specialized training, and began marketing our expanded services. The challenge energized me, giving me a renewed sense of purpose professionally. As these changes took root, I found my perspective on Elizabeth's betrayal shifting. I still felt the pain of it, but I no longer defined myself by it. Her affair wasn't a reflection of my worth. It was a reflection of her character, her choices. The anger that had consumed me began to dissipate, replaced by something closer to pity. Elizabeth had thrown away something valuable for something fleeting, and that was her burden to bear, not mine. 18 months after discovering Elizabeth's affair, I stood in the vestibule of St. Mark's Episcopal Church, adjusting my tie as I prepared to walk Sarah down the aisle. The divorce had been finalized nearly a year ago, and while Elizabeth and I maintained a cordial relationship for our children's sake, this would be the first major family event where we would both be present. "You look beautiful," I told Sarah, my voice thick with emotion. She was radiant in her white gown, her eyes bright with happiness. The ceremony was perfect, simple, elegant, and deeply moving. As I placed Sarah's hand in David's, I felt a profound sense of peace. My daughter had found a good man, who looked at her with genuine love and respect. Despite the example her mother and I had ultimately set, Sarah had not become cynical about marriage. At the reception, Elizabeth and I sat at separate tables but exchanged polite greetings. She had come alone. Her relationship with Mark had ended several months ago, according to Michael. I felt no satisfaction in this news, only a distant sadness for all that had been lost. During the dinner, I found myself seated beside a woman I didn't recognize. "A friend of David's family," she explained. "I'm Julia Winters," she said, offering her hand. She was about my age, with warm brown eyes and an easy smile. "I'm David's godmother." "Ah, so you're the dentist," she said with a smile. "David speaks highly of you." Our conversation flowed naturally from there. Julia was a professor of literature at UNC Chapel Hill, widowed 5 years ago after her husband lost his battle with cancer. She had 2 grown sons, both living on the West Coast, and a passion for hiking that had taken her to trails across the country. I found myself laughing genuinely for the first time in months as she recounted a disastrous camping trip where she'd encountered a family of raccoons raiding her food supply. "I have never seen such organized thieves," she chuckled. "They had a system. One distracted me while the others made off with my entire supply of trail mix." As the evening progressed, we exchanged phone numbers. "In case you ever want recommendations for hiking trails," she said with a smile that suggested she hoped I would call for other reasons as well. Over the next few months, Julia and I developed a friendship that gradually deepened into something more. We took things slowly, both of us carrying the weight of our past relationships. We met for coffee, then dinners, then weekend hikes along the Blue Ridge Parkway. I found in her a companion who challenged me intellectually and accepted me as I was, scars and all. 6 months after Sarah's wedding, Julia and I were having dinner at my condo when she mentioned she'd always wanted to visit Italy. "I've never been to Europe," she admitted. "Richard was always too busy with his practice, and then when he retired, he got sick." "Elizabeth and I always talked about going to Italy when we retired," I said, surprised that I could mention this without pain. "We never made it a priority." Julia reached across the table and took my hand. "Maybe it's time to make it a priority now." The next day, I called a travel agent and began planning a 2-week trip to Italy for the following spring. Florence, Rome, Venice, and the Amalfi Coast. As I reviewed the itinerary, I felt a sense of anticipation I hadn't experienced in years. That evening, I sat on my balcony overlooking the ocean, reflecting on the journey of the past 18 months. The betrayal that had nearly destroyed me had ultimately forced me to rebuild myself, to rediscover parts of Robert Thompson that had been subsumed by decades of routine and complacency. I thought of Elizabeth briefly, hoping she had found her own path to healing. Despite everything, I couldn't wish unhappiness on the mother of my children, the woman who had shared 30 years of my life. But my thoughts quickly returned to Julia, to Italy, to the future stretching before me. A future I now approached not with the certainty of youth, but with the hard-won wisdom of experience. I knew that life offered no guarantees, that trust was always a risk, that love could hurt as much as it healed. And yet, as I watched the sun setting over the Atlantic, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, I found myself willing to take that risk again, not with the blind confidence of my younger self, but with the measured hope of a man who had lost everything and discovered he still had much to give, much to receive, and much to learn. The perfect life I thought I had with Elizabeth was gone. But perhaps a different kind of life, authentic, hard-earned, and deeply appreciated, was just beginning.